Today, we're looking at a couple more parts of the foundations of America. We're going to talk about amending the Constitution. So go ahead and grab a card, 1.23. You're going to need two more cards. One is going to be for the Anti-Federalists, and the other one will be for the Federalists. And we'll be moving on here with the debate over the Constitution. All right, amending the Constitution. This is kind of leftover from the different parts of the Constitution that we already talked about. I want to talk about Article 5. Remember, 5 alive, A and alive for amending the Constitution. 5 alive, A, amending. And so let's talk about that in a little bit more depth so you know, because you need to know exactly what it takes to amend the Constitution. So first off, at the top, just kind of make a little title up top, due to compromises. All right, I mean, in order to make the Constitution be something that actually happened, to make sure that the country was united, rather than split off into separate groups like the southern states and the northern states. In order to make sure that didn't happen, there had to be compromises. But that meant that there also needed the ability to change the Constitution in the future because future generations may not like exactly what was set up. And so there's this built-in aspect that we all understand. All right, so first off, yes, Article 5 is amending the Constitution. Article 5, couple bullet points here. Article 5 is amending the Constitution. 5 alive, A for amending. All right, what does that entail? If you need to pause at any moment, always do that. The proposal is passed by 2/3 vote by both houses. A proposal has to be passed by 2/3 vote of both houses. Notice that's a supermajority. Like, in order to change this Constitution, you're going to have pretty widespread support. It's not just going to happen because a simple majority wants to do that. And there's a lot of things in the Constitution about like that. There's a lot of checks and balances to make sure that the 51% can't shove some bad policy on the 49%. Majority rule, yes, but majority rule with some limits here. And that kind of is built into this. Or there's a second option that people almost always forget, and most people in America probably have no idea that this exists. 2/3 by both houses, or a convention, a constitutional convention called by 2/3 of state legislatures. Now, if that convention has proposals, those proposals get passed, then they get sent on to the states to be ratified, just like we're about to talk about. But every single amendment, by the way, has always been the first one. There has never been a constitutional convention called by 2/3 of state legislatures. A couple years ago, I think the Republican Party controlled 34 state legislatures. They needed 2 more in order to have the 2/3 majority. And there was talk that they might call a convention and propose some amendments. But of course, it's never happened because the Democrats have won back several states' legislatures. So that's neither here nor there. All right. The next part is ratification. In order to ratify a constitutional amendment, 3/4 of the states have to pass the amendment. 3/4 of the states have to pass the amendment. So 2/3 of both houses, or a state convention, which has never happened, a state constitutional convention, and then ratification by 3/4 of states. That's tough. I mean, think about it. We've had 27 amendments in over 240 years of our country's history. And the first 10 came in like the first year. So there's only been 17 amendments in the last 240 years, 200, or so. And so that's pretty hardcore, in order to keep our system the way it is. And of course, some of those amendments are huge. All right. So put that off to the side. Now, you don't have to write this, so don't write it yet. We're going to talk here about the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists and how the debate over ratifying the Constitution, like kind of the way the sides were set up. So we're going to have 2 cards. One's going to be the Anti-Federalists. One will be the Federalists. All right, so 1.24. Card 1.24. Let's start with the Anti-Federalists. Start with the Anti-Federalists. All right, once you get that written down, flip over. Or as I like to say, flip over, but don't flip out. I know that's a bad joke. All right, backside, Anti-Federalists. So you don't have to write the title at the top. Just go ahead and start with the first bullet point. So like Patrick Henry, George Mason, they were kind of the typical Anti-Federalists. They did not trust this new federal government that's being created. It was far too strong. Let's look at some of the things. Also that they were looking at. So also rural farmers. Rural areas tended to be more Anti-Federalists. Why did they oppose the Constitution? So let's put the bullet points down of why they oppose it. You don't have to write that if you don't want, but let's look at why they opposed it. One, they believe that a large republic, like what the U.S. is going to be set up to be, because we have all these different areas, and from Georgia all the way up to what is now Maine, that's a large republic. Even by ancient standards, it's very, very, very large. Matter of fact, by ancient standards, it is really large. When you think about republics like Greece, the Greek republics. And it's unresponsive. Like it's too big. Like they just don't respond to what the citizens want. Only a small republic can do that. You'll see that in Brutus, the Anti-Federalist papers that will be written. They also said that the new national government would threaten the sovereignty of the states. That basically the states would get owned by the national government, and the states would have very little power to do things outside of what the national government wanted. One could make an argument that the states are far weaker now than they were from 200 and some odd years ago. There's no question that the federal government has grown in power, and the Anti-Federalists will probably look at this today and say, see, I told you so. They also thought the presidency would essentially be a monarchy. Like it was a position that would lead to monarchy. Yeah, not so much. They believed the judiciary was uncontrollable. The idea of having a national judiciary that could rule potentially things unconstitutional, this would be uncontrollable. Some people believe the Supreme Court has too much power now. And the last big thing, and this was the issue that led to the Bill of Rights, is they believe it needed a Bill of Rights, and it didn't have one. And James Madison, essentially, along with some other Federalists, are going to promise a Bill of Rights in order to win votes over in places like Virginia or New York. And so that's going to be something that's going to be a big argument of the Anti-Federalists, and it will get answered. It'll get answered. The other ones are more like predictions about the future, but the Bill of Rights is something that the Federalists can say, okay, fine, we'll pass a Bill of Rights, and they did. All right, that's really that sums up what the Anti-Federalist position is. We'll look more into that when we look at Brutus 1. All right, the Federalist 1.25. Go ahead and write that down. Pause if you need to, because I'm jumping on the back side of this card and rocking and rolling. All right, so the Federalists included people like Washington, James Madison, Alexander Hamilton. They were the people who were most strongly believed that there needed to be a more powerful national government given the situation with Shays' Rebellion and other issues happening around the country. Urban areas, big cities like Philadelphia, Boston, and in places like New York, those places tended to be more Federalist. Why did they support it? Don't have to write that. Just put the bullet points. Big number one, and I've already just mentioned this, but they feared rebellions and chaos like Shays' Rebellion. They feared rebellions and the chaos like Shays' Rebellion. And I just put Shays. When you go to college, you got to learn to take notes, take good notes, and not necessarily write everything. If you're trying to write everything the professor's saying, it's not going to be good. So you've got to be smart and abbreviate things. That's why I leave out things when I'm writing. I leave out ands, and I might just use a plus sign. So, I do that sometimes when I am giving notes to you. They needed a strong central government that could act, not only against chaos and rebellions, but also against potential invasion. And the fact that the Articles of Confederation meant that the national government had to basically beg states for money, and the states would often just not pay. This was untenable. In fact, the reason, basically the Articles of Confederation we set up a confederacy, and it was its downfall was the fact that the states were so strong and the national government was so weak. Well, that's also the reason the Confederacy lost the Civil War. Ultimately, what did them in was the fact that they were a confederacy, and it made it weak, and therefore it kind of fell apart. At the end of the war, you had states not giving troops, to the Confederacy, and it helped lead to its downfall, thankfully. Also, regulate commerce. Commerce between the states specifically, and commerce with foreign powers. And then another issue was this idea that state governments, at the time, the state governments were what Madison called the tyranny of the majority. The tyranny majority meant that like 51% would win in the state, and then they would try to ruin the minority, the 49% who voted against them. So this idea of party and we win and then we try to wreck the other side, this happened in the state governments, and it led to really bad policy. In fact, the state that is most most associated with this is Rhode Island, which the founders called Rogue Island. But Rhode Island, the majority wins, and they immediately decide that the debt sucks. So therefore, they inflate the currency. Inflating the currency helps the people that are paying it back, because you're paying back debt with dollars that are less valuable. And they inflated the currency and like literally destroyed the economy of the state of Rhode Island. I mean, Rhode Island was a hot mess. They were the state that also didn't show up to the Constitutional Convention. And so Rhode Island was like, everybody like, oh my goodness, like we don't want more Rhode Islands. And so people get wound up about something and then they pass dumb policy. So having a national government that's a little bit more powerful might be able to, assuage some fears of Rhode Island's. Okay, cool. So the last thing is they believed that no Bill of Rights was needed. Eventually, they're going to support a Bill of Rights, Madison and Hamilton, but they believe that checks and balances protect rights. The other concern about having a Bill of Rights is that if there was a right that wasn't mentioned, then like that'll be assumed that you don't really have that right. Hence the Ninth Amendment, by the way, which says that any rights not listed are reserved to the people or to the state. So those sort of things are, they were worried about that like you'd assume that like, well, you didn't list freedom to walk down the street and buy a soda, so therefore you don't have that right. They were worried that not listing something would make people assume that you didn't have the right. So eventually, though, they do support it in order to get the Anti-Federalist support to win votes in states like New York and Virginia. All right, awesome. So that is the Federalist versus Anti-Federalist. There's some practice for this. You need to do it. You need to do a good job with it. This is probably some familiar material from U.S. history courses, but that's our review for today. Hey, thanks. Bye.